Good day, everyone. Yeah, they're very. So today, obviously, I want to talk about a few things. You can say "good day" to me. Okay, sorry, Tamara. Good day to you. Good day to you, Tamara. Oh, wait a sec. Can I say it like in an American accent, but like I sound like I'm from the South? Like, good day to you, ma'am. Good day, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Okay, that's really bad. I'm sorry. Hi, Charlie. Hi, Marnie. Good to see you again, Marnie. Thanks for joining. Really appreciate that. No, I didn't mean that. I meant bidet. The way he's. Oh, it's not bidet. I'm pretty sure is a toilet. I'm pretty sure bidet is actually a toilet. So I'm not going to say bidet to you because I feel like that could be offensive tomorrow. But I will say g'day, not bidet. I will say g'day, g'day. Yeah. Good evening from Charleston, South Carolina, Joe, and all in the chat. Thank you so much, Marnie. Thank you so much for joining. Oh, the Cajun Contrary. Thank you for joining. You, I just can't text. That's all. Okay. So I know. G'day. That's better. Yeah. But bidet is something that I don't feel a lot of people would like. Maybe in Japan because they have those really good toilets, like really good bidet toilets in Japan. Um, but yeah, otherwise, let's just say good day. Good day from Australia. So thank you so much for joining, everyone. So today I'm going to talk about a few different things. I know what it is. Yeah, thank you, Tamara. I knew you did. I knew you did. I knew you did. Um, so I want to talk about a few things today. First of all, g'day. Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much for the g'days. I'm going to give Marnie some hearts there because she said it. She said it right. Yeah. Um, so I want to talk about a few things today. One of them is the elections in New York City, and there's been a little bit of controversy about the people who won in New York, and that maybe they don't quite. And there's a lot of excitement, and I will say some of that excitement is where is the Democratic Party in the United States heading? Like, where is it heading? Is it heading towards? Um, oh, first did Australia win in the cup? So it hasn't started yet. So it doesn't start till for another hour. Yeah. So I'm probably only going to do like an hour today, so I can watch it. Yeah, so Australia is playing today so for those of you who are not following, Australia is playing in the World Cup soccer today, and we are really, really hoping that Australia wins. Yeah, today. Now I do have a backup team, and because my on one side of my family is I have Spanish heritage, so they come from Spain. So if Australia loses, I'll start going for Spain. And apparently Spain's like one of the favourites. So I can't lose either way. Smash those hearts for Joe. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the hearts. Really appreciate the hearts. They do that. Actually, I found out that the more people press the hearts, the better it is for the algorithm. For some reason, I don't know why, but the more people smash the hearts, the better it is for the algorithms. So smash those hearts until your heart's content. I want to smash some as well. Let me join in with those hearts. There you go. Look at that. That's amazing. Look at those beautiful hearts. God, I hope Australia wins today. Yes, Mary. I know. So do I. And I think they've got a good chance. I think they've got a good chance of winning. We have a good side. We won. We did very well in the first one. We didn't do as well in the second one. Um, However, against the United States of America. Now, in honesty, the American team seems to be a pretty good team this year. So yeah, I think it's interesting that I think Australia and America have similar cultures when it comes to soccer. Is that a lot of young people play soccer, but then they don't go on to play professional soccer. So it's not like a very. And I think the reason for that is because I think a lot of parents want their kids to play soccer instead of contact sport where people, like NFL or in Australia, rugby league. They want their kids playing soccer because they don't feel it's as violent. So it's a lot of the parents pushing soccer onto their kids. And a lot of the kids are probably like, I only did this because my parents thought it was safer for me to play. But I don't mind soccer, but I don't follow it every day. Um, so yeah, but anyway, back to politics. In America, the other day we had we had the elections. There's a little bit of controversy at the moment in sense of where the Democratic Party is heading. So I'd love to know, and it's cheaper to let your kids play soccer than to do something like hockey or football. Oh, right, I didn't know that. Okay, that kind of also explains as well because you don't have as much. There would be a lot of equipment to buy, I guess, with football. You got all the protective gear, don't you? As an American, I'm rooting for Australia. Thank you so much, Marnie. Really appreciate that. I'll pass that on to the Australian soccer team, Marnie. I'll let them know as soon as this finishes, and I'm sure they will. That extra thing that they're going to get from us, I think, is going to push them forward to win this game against them. Yeah. In Australia, we have it's a bit of a bogan thing. A bogan thing is a bit of like but in Australia, some people go Aussie, 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 oi, oi, oi. It's a bit of like a thing that people do it at like when they're watching like a sports game. Doesn't have to be soccer, could be anything, and so you'll get parts of the audience. They'll go Aussie, 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 and then the other part will go oi, oi, oi. That's kind of our claim. It's a bit boganish, but you know, it's part of, kick our ass. Yeah, 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 exactly. Kick our ass. Your ass. Kick your ass. Bogan means redneck. Yeah, that's right. Thanks, Mary. Yeah, bogan means in Australia, when we say bogan, that's like a redneck. Yeah, that's what that means. You're like a redneck. Yeah. Um, but yeah, I you know I got nothing wrong with bogans. Some bogans are all right. Steve Irwin was kind of, I reckon, a bogan. You could have called Steve Irwin a bogan, maybe, possibly. He would have been a bogan. But he was a nice bogan. Steve Irwin was a nice bogan, I think. Paul Hogan would probably consider it. Yeah, you'd probably consider him a bogan as well. Um, so not all bogans are bad, but yeah. But anyway, I want to talk about the New York elections, and I'm wondering, and I'd love to know people in the chat what they think about it. Do they think because I think there's two parts of it, right? I think there is a part of the Democratic Party that is having like a heart attack, right? But when you think about it, the amount of people who are in the Democratic Party who will consider themselves like democratic socialists, or I think there's four people, right? There's actually like four people in the whole Democratic Party in either the Senate or the House of Representatives who kind of think like some of the people who won the election. So you're talking about like 1% of the Democratic Party. On the other side, there are people in the more progressive left who think that that what you're seeing now is a representation. I think Mandani created a new election. But yeah, I think he did, Tamara. But you have, when you look at the actual, because I'm a bit of a data nerd. Like I like looking at polling and I love looking at data. Like I would just like look for data in American politics. I look for data. And what you see is a lot of these, like the candidates that won, like Bob Lander and the other ones that won, right? I think Adani's a new election paradigm. I think if you look at where they won in New York, they won in the same boroughs, right, that Mandami did well. So they've kind of it wasn't new areas of New York, right? It was the same areas. Hi, Elise. Thanks for joining. It's the same areas, but it's the same areas that Mandami did well. So there's an overlap between Mandami's win and the other people who won. Yeah, thank you for joining. And so in that sense, it's not new ground. Do you know what I mean? So it's not a new area that's done. So I don't know. Like I'm not saying like I don't know. I don't think there's enough data yet. But the big question is not can progressives. I'm talking about like democratic socialist type people. Um, I'm I don't know if there's enough data to say outside of New York in certain boroughs or outside of California in certain boroughs, how effective it's going to be. Because when you look at the other special elections, it's not all progressives who are winning. There's a lot of moderates who are doing very well as well. And it all seems to be based on what area you're in, right? What area you're doing it in. So it's I can see both sides. There's a formal strategy in the Democratic Party who lives in New York City that watching a mini meltdown of Madani backs candidates winning in New York. Yeah. Look, I can see, Marnie. I can see two sides of this. I can see the left getting too excited about this when the data doesn't show that outside of these areas, they're voting in people like these people in New York, right? The data doesn't show that at the moment. On the other hand, I think on the right, like the Democratic, like Hakeem Jeffries, Chuck Schumer's, and all that, I think they're over exaggerating what the issue is. They seem to think, they seem to think, right? And I think they're falling into Donald Trump MAGA media talking points, which is that the Democratic Party at the midterms and the Democratic Party at the midterms and Democratic Party at the next elections, they're going to be tarnished with some of the things that these people have said, right? And I think they're wrong. And the reason I think they're wrong, there's something about and by the way, I'm not someone who just hates on anybody who's a moderate or Hakeem Jeffries and stuff like that, because at the end of the day, this is why I don't hate on them all the time, right? At the end of the day, they represent a certain part of the Democratic Party. It's just true. Not all the Democrats are progressives, right? Not the Democratic Party is to some degree a big tent. You have the Democratic Socialists on the left, and then you have more moderate people on the right. But I have to say this: when Joe Biden was president, a lot of those moderates, right, and centre left people, they actually voted for very progressive policies, like the infrastructure policy, right, and other types of policies that they recommended. So it's not fair to say that everybody in the Democratic Party is some sort of right wing, whatever, because a lot of them will actually vote for progressive policies when it's done correctly. So now the other thing is I think where Hakeem Jeffries and also the MAGA movement are getting things wrong is that this is not the swing states will not be so progressive. Yeah, exactly. They won't be. In fact, yeah, they won't be. However, I do think the populist thing will help. People want populist people to win elections these days. There's no doubt about that. They want populists. But what I don't think people understand is you can say populist things without having a history of saying like defund the police, right? Or defund this or defund that. Because I can guarantee you this. You won't win one state in the swing states by saying defund the police. No, you won't win any state by saying that, right? The vast majority of people do not want to defund the police, especially. And by the way, I will say this: a lot of the people who won, they've taken back a lot of the things they've said. So, for example, some of them have said things in the past, and now they've taken that back, right? So I think that goes a long way as well, right? Because people change. Like people like look at James Tallarico, right? James Tallarico is running in Texas. And I think there was a period, right, just after COVID when Joe Biden won. And I would say there was peak wokeism in the Democratic Party. And because Joe Biden won, you started getting a lot of people saying things like, there's 68 different genders, right? Or there's this or that, a lot of woke stuff that now a lot of people don't like, or they, not that they don't like, but, so James Tallarico has been he did an interview recently and he said, look, 5 years ago, I said some cringe things and now I regret saying those things and I don't believe those things anymore. And so he's trying to move himself away from that, right? And so I think from that point, 100%, 100% agree about not saying defund the police. ICE, a different story. Yeah, I agree. the Cajun contrary. The issue is that the Democrats have a leadership void. The socialist win scares them because they do not have a platform to offer the people. The question is, will the socialists cause a large schism in the party? See, but the Cajun contrarian, um, of course they have. Of course, the Democrats have a leadership void because Democrats have a real issue getting trapped in purity tests that cause So I'll just reply to the Cajun history. Of course, the Democrats have a leadership void because they're not running for the election, right? It's very hard to have a leader of a party when you're not the incumbent government. So you can't. So Hakeem Jeffries, um, isn't the most charismatic person in the world. Chuck Schumer is not the most charismatic person in the world. But to be fair, they're also not in power. There's only so much you can do when you're not in power. Trump is in power, right? Trump has the numbers in the House of Representatives and he has the numbers in the Senate. So there's only so much control the Democrats can have when they have no control. If you don't control the House, if you don't control the Senate, and you're not the President of the United States, and the Supreme Court is on your side, which is the Republican side, how much can the Democrats do? Right? Let's just be honest. I know it's easy to blame Democrats for everything, but they have no power. Right? Now, after the midterms, if the Democrats win the House, I think the Senate is a much harder thing to win. I'm not convinced the Democrats are going to win the House. But let's say that, sorry, not the House, I mean the Senate. I'm not convinced the Democrats are going to win the Senate. But let's say they do win the Senate. I think that leadership void will become less so because they will have some power. And with power, you get leadership. It's very hard to be the leader of a party that has no power. Um, that will change, I think, after the midterms. And in 2028, when they do the primaries, because they're going to do a proper primaries, then you're going to see the proper leader of the Democratic Party. I do not think that the Mandami section of the Democratic Party is going to be the main party. Again, they make up 1% of people in Congress, right? It is a tiny, tiny percentage. And the other thing you need to understand is that they're winning in places that the ones that they won, the seats that they won in New York, they were the seats that Mandami won. So they didn't add anything new. They didn't win in areas where Mandami lost, right? So Mandami won in some boroughs and he lost in some boroughs. But the new people who just won, they only won in areas where Mandami. So there's an average. So there's nothing really new here. The idea that people would win in areas that already voted for Mandami is not exactly as shocking as people think it is. I think the problem is I think people are over getting excited about this. And I think for Republicans, they want to use this as a tool against the Democrats and go, look at some of these, look what some of these people said. This is now the Democratic Party. But the reality is it's not the Democratic Party. At least Democrats have a real issue getting trapped in purity tests. Yeah, they do. That's true. But also the Dems cannot seem to define themselves as a party. They allow Republicans to define them. What I'm saying is that you're not building a successful order. Think Project 2025. They have no answer. Well, you can't build a successful order when you don't have any power, right? Because you can't build a successful order. Like, what are you supposed to say? Like, if you don't have the House, if you don't have if you don't have Congress, what are you doing? Like who's in charge? We don't know who's really in charge. Hakeem Jeffries doesn't have control. Chuck Schumer doesn't have control. So it's hard to say. Also, hi, Easy. Good to see you again. Also, the other thing is we're not going to know who the leader is until 2028, right? Until 2028, when Joe Biden was president, people, sure you can. Neoliberalism was being built for 30 years prior to the destruction of the New Deal order. Yeah, but I think I think what you're thinking of is in terms of I don't know if the Democratic Party really knows exactly where it stands, but it's not democratic socialism. I guarantee you democratic socialism is not going to be the top agenda of the Democratic Party. It might be a bigger part than it had been in the past, but it's not going to be the main part, right? So it will definitely increase, but again, the Cajun country, you're talking at the moment. There's 1% of people. If you listen to the news, you would think half the Democratic Party was socialist. Hi, Dave from California. Good to see you. You would think half the Democratic, but it's not. It's 1%. There is this gross exaggeration, and the exaggeration is coming from the Republican Party because it works in their favor. Of course, it works in their favor to say everyone thinks like some of these people, right? And then on the other hand, you have moderate Democrats who are also criticizing it. So it can seem like it's a bigger issue than it actually is, right? Because it works in favor of the moderate Democrats and it works in favor of them. However, I think you can be a populist, right? I think populism is a big thing. It's happening in my country. I've been talking about that recently. Populism is rising in Australia. Right wing populism has gone through the roof in my country just in the last 6 months. I've already talked about this. And one thing that you notice is you're right, and depends on who is defining socialism. Exactly. Because I will say this: if you ask, I speak to a lot of young people. I'm also on like TikTok Live now. I do TikTok Live videos where I actually debate. I debate a lot of mostly young people, like in their 20s, 18, who are right wing people. And then I sometimes will talk to someone they call themselves a socialist. And what I find there seems to be one thing in common between people who are on the who consider themselves full on I'm talking about full on socialists, and people who consider themselves like right wing populists. If you ask them about policy, a lot of them don't know a lot about it. Right? If you ask a full on young person socialist, what is socialism? They will say something that sounds like my country, Australia. And what they mean is social democracy. All right. I come from a social democratic country. Europe is a social democratic country, but we're not socialist countries. We're capitalist countries. And when I talk to people from America, young people who say they're socialists, they say, "Oh, we want a same system as you do." And I say, "Well, we don't have a socialist system." Right. So I think there's some confusion about what socialism is. There is full on socialism, which is that you don't have private business. And then you have the type of my country, Europe, Scandinavia, which is mostly capitalism, but you then have better safety nets, right? So, for example, if you go to the hospital, you don't go broke. In Australia, you don't hear stories of people going to hospital and then coming out with a $30,000 bill. Do you know what I mean? So we definitely have more type of socialist programs, but we also have private insurance. In America, they call social exactly. Yeah. So again, it's hard to it's hard to understand. You kind of have to. Yes, Joe. People here mistaken social. Yeah, exactly, exactly. I honestly, a whole lot of young people are learning towards social democracy. Social democracy, in my opinion, is a good thing. Exactly. The happiest countries in the world are democratic. So I know. So Marnie, I will say this: there is a difference between social democracies and democratic socialists. In Australia, we're a social democracy. And in Europe, it's social democracy, right? In Scandinavia, so democratic socialist is different. Democratic socialism is where you actually want to bring in actual socialism, but through democratic means you've, instead of a revolution, right? Instead of having like a violent revolution, you bring it in through people voting for it. But it's still democratic socialism is close to communism, right? It's not far from communism. Um, now, so that's what I mean by there is a pretty big difference between, again, democratic socialism is socialism, social democracy is capitalism, but a milder version of capitalism, like with more social safety nets. Yeah, so they are two different things. And so, but I will say, who is pulling the string? Yeah, so I will say that I think a lot of the a lot of the young people in America, and it's not their fault. Obviously, when you're young, I feel like Nibbles wants to be in your life. So, it depends on who owns and controls the means of production. Thanks so much for correcting me on that. That's okay, Marty. That's what I'm here for. Yeah, that's what Nibbles is. I only got that. I got that information from Nibbles. Nibbles told me that. It depends on who owns. Yeah, exactly. Tomorrow. Look, I am, I am, I do think my opinion is I'm a centre left person. I do believe that capitalism does better when it comes to things like, but if you're going to own a car, a TV, that sort of stuff, capitalism is way better for that stuff. But in terms of things like hospitals, I think you have, in my opinion, the best thing is like a mixed, where you have some private and then you have the government making sure that anybody who slips through the safety nets is protected by the government, right? And that's what social democracy is. Social democracy is taking the best parts of capitalism and the best parts of socialism and putting them together. But ultimately, you have a cap. Overall, Professor Nibbles, yes. Yeah, she's actually teaching at university right now. She's actually teaching right now at university. Yeah, so I mean, again, so I think a lot. I think what underpins, yes, there are definitely things that a market system doesn't reconcile very well, like electricity, healthcare, and go as far as education. Yeah, Dave, I absolutely agree. Was just trying to say that very thing. Yeah, yeah. So the other thing I was going to say is, I think a lot of the stuff that kind of underpins this is that a lot of people, whether they want, I don't think people really care. This is the other thing that's, I think, on top of all this is, I don't think people really care what you call it. I don't think people care whether you call it socialism, democratic socialism, social democracy. I think the conversation has kind of moved on from that. And I think a lot of young people, they don't really care about the labels. They more care about their lives getting better. Right. And so for them, it's more about, who's the person who's going to make my life better. It's interesting that a lot of the people that voted for Zoran Mandami weren't necessarily working class people. A big amount of the people who voted for Zoran Mandami were college educated people who, when they left college, they couldn't find a good job. So they had this big debt. They ended up with like this big debt, right? And then they couldn't get the job that they thought they were going to get. So they in a sense they feel like they did everything correctly, right? They went to uni, they studied hard, they did this, and then they leave university and they end up not end up. Hi, Kimmy, thank you, thanks for joining, and then they end up not doing that well. So that seems to be a lot of the constituents of of Zora Mandani, well-educated people who have not had the success that they thought their university degrees would have given them. So that's kind of left-wing populism, right? Left-wing populism is more educated people who are struggling financially. Right-wing populism, right, is people who didn't go to universities or colleges who were struggling economically. So, in my opinion, in 2026, that is the main difference between left-wing populism and right-wing populism. On the left, it's college-educated people who after they spent all this time and money on university, and they come out and they find out their job has been automated, or IT has got rid of their jobs, or automation, or AI, so they don't have a job. And therefore, because they're college educated, they're more attracted to someone like Zoran Mandani or someone on the left. If you don't have a college degree and you've had a similar experience, but you didn't go to college, but you're still struggling economically, you will go to someone like Trump, like MAGA. That, in my opinion, is the biggest differences between populism on the left and populism on the right. It's based on education. Education is the biggest thing, right? So, again, in Australia, you see the same thing. We have a far right-wing party called One Nation, run by Pauline Hanson, who's been around for 30 years in the Senate in Australia. And just in the last 6 months, right, she's become very popular. But the people who follow Pauline Hanson, are mostly people who didn't go to university, but they are struggling economically. Now, the people who follow the Greens, so the Greens party is like the more progressive side. So you have the centre left party, which is the Labor Party, but then you have the Greens on one side and you have One Nation on the other. Now, the Greens side, they get the college educated people, right, on that side of politics. And in Australia, it sometimes a lot of the things that a lot of people vote for the Greens in Australia have to do with climate change. So a lot of people who follow the Greens in Australia, one of the top reasons they follow them is because they feel the other major parties aren't doing enough about climate change. So that's why they follow the Greens in Australia. So, yeah, so I think it's interesting when you look at populism, because populism is definitely on the rise everywhere. But I will say one thing about populism, and I like populists. I like I like policies, right? I'm someone, I remember when Barack Obama brought in Obamacare, right? And I was following that really closely. I was like, "Oh, this is really interesting." And you know what I loved about it? Back then, everyone was talking about the policy. And I don't just mean in a good way. Some people would go, "You know what about this?" And then someone, it was either Obama uh, or someone else in the Democratic Party, right? They would go on TV and they would debate their policy. And everyone was talking about the policy. And then I remember Obama held this thing. It was on TV. And it was a debate. Half of the people were Democrats, the other half were Republicans. And I think Mitt Romney was like the other person. And they debated Obamacare, the policy. They just debated the policy. And I missed that. I actually really missed that because now populism is just people voting for someone, right? Voting for someone because their life is not doing very well. And so they're looking for something different, right? But the, the problem with the populist party these days is I don't hear a lot about the policies. Like when people voted for MAGA, sometimes people said, I want less immigration, right? There was that. But in terms of healthcare, infrastructure, nobody really cared about that stuff. They didn't. There was no real conversation about it. It was just immigration. That was it. So there's not a lot of detail. People don't talk about policy um, as much as they used to in the old days, and I miss that. I miss the conversations and debates about the actual policies instead of saying. So when I say, I don't hate Graham Plattner. I don't like what Graham Plattner said and did before. I don't like some of that stuff, but I understand why people like Graham Platinum. However, I so what a sec. Elise, also the cycle of Dems in the White House economy soars. Republicans in the White House economic tanks, rinse and repeat, but now that's Trump has blown it up, so it's affecting the people. Also, cycle soars. Yeah, to some degree, Marnie, I dream to have respectful political debates. Joe, I hear you, so please explain the difference between why the educated are choosing X and the uneducated choosing X. What explains this? I have an opinion, but I want you to explain what you think this is happening. Okay, so I think why it's happening, I think why the populist left, it's a good question. I think why the populist left moving towards people like Zora Mandami and the populist right are moving to like Trump and MAGA is because um, if you're well educated, right? If you're well educated, you don't blame immigrants, right? If you're well educated, you're smart enough to know it's not about immigration, right? If so, I think that's one of the biggest reasons because um, if you're a lot of the far right wing parties around the world, whether it's Trump or One Nation or in the UK, Nigel Farage, is that there are a lot of people who don't have a lot of education. And then what they do is they say it's all because of immigrants. Now, if you didn't have immigrants, your life would be a lot better, right? And they give you simplistic answers to complicated questions and simplistic slogans for simplistic people. Now that sounds a bit rude. I'm not saying that, and it's not necessarily saying that all people who don't have a college degree are dumb. They're not, absolutely not. But what I'm saying is that if you have a college degree, you're more likely to see through right? Some of the simplicity is about race. If you have a college degree, you're less likely to see life through the prism of race or see life through the prism of immigration is bad. Those are the type of things that I think is more something that working class people or on that side will believe. So that's why I don't think educated people are attracted to MAGA, right? The socialists will also give simplistic. I agree, but the Cajun contrarian, I agree with that. But I think it's different. I think it is different, right? I do agree. I do agree, Cajun, that there is simplicity, and I gave the example before, and the example before was Graham Plattner, right? Graham Plattner, whether you like him or not, whenever he gets asked about like healthcare, whenever he gets asked about anything, he doesn't know the answer because he doesn't have that experience. He's someone who was in the Marines, then left the Marines, right, and then did some stuff. He's not this like stuff. Let's just be honest. Like things like healthcare are incredibly complicated. It's not, you can't just say, oh, let's just do this and fix it. It's incredibly complicated. And you know what? You know why it's so complicated? Because healthcare today is 1,000 times more complicated than it was 20 years ago because a lot of the healthcare departments now have really, really complicated MRI machines, all these sort of IT stuff. So they've got to hire tech. It's a lot more technical than it used to be, which means it's a lot more expensive to run hospitals than it used to be. So when someone like Graham Plattner gets asked a question, he doesn't have an answer because it's an incredibly complicated question. And again, the Cajun is right. Populism sometimes lacks, right? Populism sometimes lacks detail, right? It lacks detail. Yeah, that's the part of populism I don't like. I love to hear, and again, I'm saying this so when Obamacare came out, right? When Obamacare came out, I was like, oh, this is really good. But then sometimes I would hear people debating Obamacare from the right, and I'd go, "Oh, that's a good point." I never just made it about. I never just made it about left and right. Like I want policy to work. I want people to have a better life. I don't want people to just say things that sound good, but then if you implement them, they make your life worse. It has to be something that works. Yeah. It's a combination of culture and education. Red states are less educated than blue states. It's not just a function of education. Culture plays a part too. Yeah, I agree. I agree. I agree with that, Kanger. Newt Gingrich was the master of the races. Bullet pumper, sticker, blame everyone. Yeah, exactly. It's educated than but yeah. Look, I agree with that. I agree with all that. Yeah, I think I think culture plays a bit of a part in it as well. Obviously, there is this thing in America where if you're religious, like if you believe in God, you're more likely to be a Republican, like no matter what. Yes, Joe, this is why I asked the question. I have an advanced degree and I'm able to discern between the things that are complex and multifaceted, but most are uninclined to go that deep and must be willing to explore and think. At least, yeah, okay, yeah, exactly, Izzy, I agree. And the problem with populism, and by the way, I get this with the Greens in Australia. Let me give you an example. The Greens in Australia wanted to bring in rent control, right? Rent control. Now, on some level, sometimes people go, rent control sounds like a great idea, but it depends on how it's implemented. And I'll give you an example. When sometimes when you try to implement rent control, what happens is that landlords start selling their properties because they don't make any money, right? And then they sell it, and guess what? You have less stock. And then when you have less stock, rents go up. So, it's sometimes things can sound good, and then you implement them and they have the opposite effect. And that's what I mean by I love people to debate. I don't like it. I don't like it when someone gives that the argument that I just said and someone turns around and goes, oh, you're just for the elites. Oh, you're just for this. Oh, you're just like let's not have that argument. Let's have the argument about what actually works, right? Don't throw names at people. Don't call Zara Mandami a communist. Debate with him his policy, right? Debate his policy. Do you think his policies are going to work? Don't just call him a communist. Debate his policies. Because, in my opinion, I think Zoran Mandani, even though he's a democratic socialist, I feel like he's been a lot more pragmatic than people give him credit for. I think he's been a lot more, I think he's actually been quite good. And I think at the end of the day, there's probably going to be more people on the left who don't like him in a couple of years than people on the right because he's very pragmatic. He's very pragmatic. I think Zoran Mandami was underrated. And all these people who said he's going to turn New York into a communist, Muslim thing, it just like obviously that never happened and that was crap. So, they were wrong. Zoran Mandami um, is essentially governing like a centre-left progressive man. He's not governing as some wild Stalinist communist. Um, Joe, we don't even have civics class in school anymore. Kids don't learn how government is supposed to work. Civics class used to be our classes in school. Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't realize that you had that. I agree, Joe, about Mandani. Well, think about, honestly, what's that? Well, think about the character of debate itself. Rules and debate you had, tell the truth, no harm on attacking you exist anymore. Exactly. He's doing great things in New York. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, I think I just don't like this. I do miss debates on policy. You know what I mean? I do miss like I remember. Do you remember Michael Moore, the documentary guy, the left wing documentary guy? And he did this documentary that actually did really well in Australia, and it was called Sicko, and it was about the American healthcare system. Right, remember he did that on the American healthcare system, and that documentary was shown widely in Australia. It's like a very popular one. And Michael Moore would then go on all these shows like MSNBC, CNN, Fox News, and he would debate the information, right, on the on his documentary. And some people would say, "Oh, look, I don't agree with this, and I don't agree with that," and then he push back and stuff like that. These days, I don't think that would happen. These days, the argument would be, "Oh, you're just an elitist. That's why you don't like what I'm saying." And on the other hand, it'd be like, "You're just a communist." Like, let's have an argument about the debate, like about the issues, right? And I think that's the best way to, about the thing. And I think that's the interesting thing about Zoran Mandani is, um, yeah, that's remember when the news was just facts? Exactly, Elise. Exactly, Elise. And again, I think this is part of the wider problem is that news has become like 95% opinion, right? It's like 95% opinion, Elise, and now and 5% straight news. Years ago, like in the 90s, when I was growing up in the 90s and stuff, I would watch the news and it was like 95% straight news and then you would make up your own mind. Can you believe that? You would have to actually make up your own mind to what happened in the news. You would have to use critical thinking skills and go, I agree with that. I think this happened. I think that happened. Now, right now, the opinion news is the straight news. Exactly. I agree. I agree, the cadre. Yeah. Now, the opinion news is the straight news. And what happened with that is that everyone started calling, that's when people started saying, you can't trust mainstream media. That came from mainstream media becoming opinionated. And I think the problem with that is if you're on the right, you would go, that's not what I believe. And what they're actually arguing against is not the straight news. When people say, I don't trust mainstream media, they're actually arguing against the opinion side of mainstream media, right? Um, yeah, so it's the opinion side. And now I have to say, I'm not going to take responsibility for this, but a lot of this happened when someone from Australia, and I'm not going to mention his name, went to America in the 90s and set up a news organization. And that news organization really pushed opinion news, right? And that guy now, or that man now, who's quite old, he's a very old man now, is now an American citizen. So obviously I can't take responsibility for him anymore because he left Australia, renounced his Australian citizenship, and is now an American citizen who owns a massive, massive news. I'm not going to say it, Donna. I'm not going to say it. Donna, please don't. Please don't. You did, yeah, no, I'm not going to say it. I'm not going to say his name, but yes, somebody from Australia went to America and created this massive news organization. Can you believe he's still living? Damn you, Ray. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. That's who I'm talking about. Yeah, but I will say that the news organization that he started in America, right? That particular person, I literally cut the cord on all TV because I was so sick of it. Maggers are buying up all the networks. Exactly. So that particular news organization, before then, that they came from the fairness doctrine being lifted and the commercialization of news talk opinion. Yeah, that's true, Cajun. But I will say this: that the Fox News was the first one to really bring in super opinion news. Like, if you look before that, CNN and a lot of the other networks were very straight news. And then what happened is that Fox News was so incredibly successful at opinion news that other networks started copying them. So CNN started copying them, MSNBC started copying them. And then so they were the leaders in pushing opinion news. Essentially what they did is they took talkback radio, right? Talkback radio, and they put talkback radio into the news. That's all it is. It was like talkback radio on TV. Um, so you know, and he did. And by the way, this particular man, who I'm not going to mention his name, he did the same thing in Australia. He did the same thing in Australia with a news organisation. That same man, right, still owns a lot of newspapers in Australia, but the thing is, he's lost a lot of his power because people don't read newspapers anymore. So what used to happen is when there was an election in Australia, the whoever didn't matter whether you're left wing or right wing, they would go and kiss his ring. They would go and kiss this man's ring because they didn't want all his newspapers going against him, right? So he had a lot of power in this country. Now, his power has diminished because people don't read newspapers anymore. So that could be a positive side of it. Again, in my opinion, I think the loss of mainstream media is a very bad thing. I think it's a very bad thing because as bad as mainstream media is, online media is 1,000 times worse. And I mean 1,000 times worse, right? There is not, you don't have a Tucker Carlson on mainstream media, but Fox News lies constantly, no truth can be found, and that's still truth. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. But I think I think if you're going to try and fix the problem, I think you can't just make it. Yeah, it has to be it can't just be Fox News because here's the problem. If you go to Fox News, if you say the problem is only Fox News, then what's going to happen is half the country is going to go, well, you're just trying to make the news left wing. I think to fix the problem, you can't make it political. You can't make it left wing or right wing. The way I think you fix the problem is you turn um, mainstream news into straight news, and that doesn't matter whether you're Fox News or CNN or MSNBC or New York Times or Washington Post. You say 90% of our news is going to be straight news with no opinion. This is what happened today. You make up your own mind. That's the way you fix it. And you can't just say it's Fox News because if you say that, it's never going to work. You got to do it across the board, right? You got to do it across the board, and then True Joe, much of that other mainstream, yeah. So I just think we need to go back to I think we just need to go back to straight news. A little bit of it's okay to have. There's always been some opinion, right? There's always been some opinion, but let's just make it the small part of the news, right? It went from being this to being this. Let's flip it, right? And then the other thing that could happen is that people start using their critical thinking skills again. Joe, what percentage of Aussies would be considered far right? Well, if you asked me that money 6 months ago, I would have said 10%, right? But since the solution to go back to the fairness doctrine, definitely across the board. Yep, I agree. Yeah. Joe, what percentage of Aussies would be considered far right? So, as I said, for people who don't know much about Australia, in the last 6 months, we've seen the rise of a far right wing party who went from getting 10% of the vote and is now getting 30% of the vote, right? So, sorry, the polling, not the vote, sorry, polling. They're polling. So they went from, and this particular party's been around for 30 years and only got about 10% of the polls. Um, so I don't know. It's a hard question to ask at the moment. It's a bit of a hard question. Hi, neurodivergent. Thanks for joining. It's a bit of a hard question to ask because I don't know. I don't know how much of this new movement towards the far right is based on immigrants or it's based on economics. I think a lot of it is based on economics. And when the Ellison removed my choice to watch Colbert, I made a choice not to watch CBS or Paramount, no matter how good the programmer might be. To hell with fascists. Yeah, hi, hey, yeah, exactly. I just think, I think, I think, a lot of times mainstream media gets criticised for very good reasons. Yeah, for very good reasons, and but I don't want to throw the baby. But when you think about it, imagine there's no New York Times. Imagine there's no Wall Street Journal, right? Imagine there's no Washington Post. Imagine there's no CNN. Like none of these things, none of these places are perfect, but they're the people who break the stories, right? So if there's something happening, right? Like, if something's happening in the White House or there's information or, something's happening overseas, like there's a war, right? The people reporting on that is mainstream news. Like the BBC will go into war areas and they will have correspondents who go there, right? Uh, in the online world, it's just people sitting in their bedrooms, like or lounge rooms like me, right? I'm not going out. I'm not going out into war zones. I'm not breaking stories about the Catholic Church. Remember, the Catholic Church and all that. That's mainstream news. So I don't think that the answer is to get rid of mainstream news. I think the answer is to make mainstream news back to what it was when it was more about straight news. You know, I don't know if you remember, but um, you know, years ago, not that far ago, I think it's the Boston Globe. Hi, Sandra, good to see you. I remember that the Boston Globe did a great story, and apparently they spent like 2 years investigating this story, and it cost them. I missed it. Hi, Joe. I'm still here. I'm still here. Hi, and the Boston Globe did this amazing story. They spent like 2 years investigating it, cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars. They had fact checkers, they had lawyers, they had, reporters, they making sure everything was sourced correctly, right? And you know what? And they found out that there was this massive thing in the Catholic Church where when a child was being molested, the priest would get moved to another place, right? I don't know if you remember this story. And it didn't just happen in America. The Catholic Church was doing it all around the world, including Australia. They broke that story. I guarantee you that story would not have been broken by some online influencer. You know what I mean? So I think we need to be careful that when we say mainstream media is bad, that we don't want to lose that. We don't want to lose investigative journalists, right? We don't want to be able to lose people who, whose whole life, they studied journalism at university. They organizations, they have fact checkers, they have, sources, they have lawyers, they have to get everything right because if they don't, they can get sued, right? So that's the FCC needs to be rebuilt and Fox needs to be dismantled. The damage is incalculable from the alone. However, the FCC must be overhauled. Yeah, exactly. I think it just needs to be whatever is done in the media, it needs to be across the board. This is my big thing, right? It can't be just Fox News. It has to be across the board and it has to be non-biased because as soon as you try to make it into your own side of politics, then you lose half the country and it doesn't work. It needs to be 90, in my opinion, that the organisation should strive to make it 90% straight news It should be 90% straight news, 10% opinion. And then I think if they did that, right, and they just tell you what happened, and then we make up our own minds. I know this sounds crazy. It does actually sound crazy that we would get told a story and then we have to make up our own mind, because so much of it now is we actually get told what to think. I got to do it across the board and says it. Yeah, like the Cajun is right. I'll keep saying it again and again. It doesn't matter. It has to be across the board. It has to be across the board because it will never work. Yeah, and that's the part that everyone on the left, of course, I agree. I'm just saying exactly, Elise. I know what you're saying, Elise. Yeah, I know what you're saying. But to go back, to news being straight news, it can't be partisan. It can't be political. Isn't that just a matter of principle, though? That's what used to teach in Julie. Exactly. It is. It is. But the problem is that it didn't make any money, right? It's a financial thing, right? And when that guy from Australia, when the guy from Australia came to America, he showed like what was happening is that Fox News started getting this uh, massive percentage, right, of the money, right, just the news, no junk, exactly. And they got massive percentage of the thing. Look, Sydney Opera House, massive percentage of the news, right, and then other CNN copied, MSNBC copied, but the problem is, right, if you're the only company doing straight news, the problem is that human nature loves conflict. It's just true. Human nature loves conflict. That's why on social media, the platforms that get the biggest audiences are ones with the most controversy, right? And everyone knows this is a human nature thing. So if you have one news organization that is doing straight news all the time, and then everyone else is doing opinion news where everyone's yelling at each other, unfortunately, human nature will go towards the controversial side. So I think it has to be across the board. And then we have to just retrain our brain. We have to retrain, except me, Joe. I hate chaos. I just want boring. Except for Sandra. Except for Sandra. There is only one person in the whole of it. Yeah, Sandra. Yeah. But Sandra is the exception. Sandra is the exception. However, Sandra does like a little bit of chaos with her photos. If you notice that Sandra often will change her photo on her account. I'm not saying it's mysterious. I'm not saying it's a conspiracy. I'm just saying that it needs to be investigated by, I don't know, somebody. We need to get to the bottom of why Sandra keeps changing her photo. I just think it's important. I've started an investigation. We'll see where it goes. Yeah. But yeah, so I think I think it's just great. And no, like PBS, yeah. And this was all what gave birth to MAGA. If you add on top of all 3 or more years of isolated COVID, just followed down. Exactly. Tamara's 100% right. Tamara, that is 100% right. There is kind of like these things that have happened over the last 10, 15 years, right? One is social media, right? The other one is the rise of opinion news, where everything is opinion, right? Third was COVID, like Tamara said. A lot of people got stuck in their homes for like 3 months or 6 months, and they went down all these rabbit holes. And suddenly, and during this period, they also moved away from mainstream news and started following online influencers, right? And started and distrust of government, right? There was all these people who distrusted government during COVID. And I think not enough people realize that there's still a hangover from that period. I think it affected a younger generation more than we realize. Um, in Australia during COVID, we actually had quite draconian, we had really harsh lockdowns here. And look, I don't know where I stand on it. It depends on where you lived in Australia. But there's a place called Melbourne in Australia, and they had the most harshest lockdowns. And there is some evidence now that young people during that period have pivoted towards right wing parties because of that period. And some of them don't even realize it. You know why? Because they went down hose, rabbit hose. I shouldn't call rabbit hose. I don't think that's a nice thing. I apologize to all rabbits. Um, because that was more exciting and fun to watch, and they could be silly. Yeah. The other thing about the thing I found about people during COVID who went down all these right wing rabbit holes. I keep calling them hose. I honestly, I don't think rabbits are hose at all. I mean, they do have a lot of babies. They do have a lot of babies, but I'm meaning rabbit holes, not hose. So again, if you're a rabbit or you're a supporter of a rabbit, I apologize. And the algorithm led them exactly where they wanted to go. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Yes. Sorry, bunnies. He didn't mean that. Yeah. I'm sorry. they're not hoes. I know. Tamara, I did apologize. I did apologize. But again, if when you think about it, they do, let's be honest, like if you're going to call, like there's a kind of a stereotype about bunnies, and I think you know the stereotype, you know what I mean? Like, anyway, I'm not, and the other thing is, if even if they were, like, why would I care? Do you know what I mean? It's not up to me. If you want to be a rabbit hole, it's perfectly okay. Like, why does it bother me whether you are? So even if you are, I support you. 100% I support your whatever you want to do. And the other thing is we're actually not having enough babies. And Catherine, you've come in at the perfect time, Catherine. Um, we're not having enough babies. Like human beings, we're actually in Australia, the United States, the UK, Europe. Uh, Joe, tell us how you think the midterms will turn out. I want your opinion. I'm not a rabbit hole. Oh, okay. Sorry. um, well, Sandra, it's hard to say. Tell us what you think the midterms will turn out. I want your opinion. Um, high positivity. I know the stereotype about bunnies, May. Yeah. And look, we support them. I mean, but they are monograph and just bounce on bunnies who they spread the love to all bunnies. No one knows. Isn't it funny when you walk into a conversation just about absolutely most hilarious moments? Yeah. Sometimes I think sometimes when people come in when we're getting a bit, towards the end of some of our Substack live, it does get a bit weird. It seems to get weird towards the end. Um, I don't know why. So I think it's sometimes because it's people like Sandra or Elise. Other people kind of make it weird, and then I kind of just feed on that weirdness. I feel like it comes from other people. It starts from other people. Um, yeah. So moving on from rabbit host, I think the midterms. It's hard to say. Like, I think we like it. Yeah, I think the midterms could go either way. Could go either way. I like to think that the Democrats are going to win. The Democrats are going to win the Senate, but I don't know. The interesting thing. Thanks, Marnie. Thank you for that. Appreciate. And by the way, I love the love hearts. The love hearts. They're amazing. Those hearts that just keep pounding. You're the ringleader, friends. You're the reason. At least you know what? I reckon if we went back and looked at all our Substack, I don't think I actually started. I think it gets started by someone else, and I just sort of follow along. Yeah, I will just be talking politics, and someone will throw something like different in, and I just go along with it. But I think I'm innocent. I think I'm innocent. Yeah. Um. So what was I saying? So yeah. So my only thing is that I'm not 100% sure that Democrats are going to win the Senate, pounding like bunnies. Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. I mean, it's up to them. It's nothing to do with us, what they do in their private lives, and why should it be? You know what I mean? I don't care. Like, if I met another human being and they said to me, I'm on Tinder, sleep, I would go, good on you. I don't care. It doesn't bother me. You know, I am bunny positive. I've always loved bunnies. I always thought they got a bad rap. You know what I mean? And yeah, I mean, yeah, I think they're fantastic animals. I love them. I mean, I prefer koalas, to be honest with you. I think koalas, um yeah, the midterms, sorry, the midterms. But yeah, I think in the midterms, platypuses, the interesting thing about platypuses is that they actually also do, um they mate a lot, platypuses do, but not to the same level as bunnies do. But it's an interesting thing that platypuses only mate in the water and bunnies only mate outside the water, but they're both known for mating a lot or having a lot of, they will have a lot of eggs. You know what I mean? Anyway, um, so yeah, so the midterms is basically more of a, you know, like, have you ever seen like, in Australia? Yeah, they lay eggs. Yeah, in Australia, we have these animals, and I don't know if you've ever heard of them. They're kind of like, they're like kangaroos. They're like kangaroos. Bunnies don't. Yeah, no, bunnies don't lay eggs. No, no, I'm not saying, no, bunnies don't lay eggs. But what I'm saying is that both bunnies and um, and platypuses, they have a lot of baby. Like in Australia, platypuses get a reputation, and again, I don't agree with this, right? I absolutely do not agree with this at all. But platypuses have a reputation of sleeping around. So they will have, a relationship with a another platypus, and then one day later they'll be with another platypus. Now I don't. I'm not. So again, I'm not judging the platypus. The platypus, if that's what the platypus wants to do, I'm just saying that sometimes, and I don't include myself, when people talk about bunnies, they will often also talk about platypuses in Australia, and in a sort of, and sometimes those people, I wonder how much of it comes from religion. Like koalas have a rep. Yeah, they do have chlamydia. I thought Australia was overrun with bunnies. We are, but not mostly in the rural areas, not in the cities. They're mostly we do have a lot of bunnies in the city, and I think not in the city, sorry, in the rural areas. They can be a massive problems in Australia. That actually bunnies are considered a pest in Australia. Now, that is what the government says about the bunnies. I have my own personal opinion about the bunnies. I don't. I mean, they are the problem with the bunnies is if you live on a farm and you work on a farm, they can destroy a lot of the food on the farm. So a lot of farmers will treat them as like a pest, right? In Alaska, bunnies are overrun every 9 years. It's a cycle. Exactly. Yeah. And that's the side of the bunnies that I think people don't like. That it can destroy, they can be a pest, they can destroy nature and stuff like that. But I separate that from them having consensual sex with other bunnies. You know what I mean? I think they're two different issues, right? And I don't think it's what when I say uh, the university liked in the States, go figure. Really, yeah, they are a pest here. Um, a lot of farmers, if you ask farmers about bunnies, they're not big fans, right? Of it because they do destroy a lot of their food and things like that. So again, I mean, I'm from the city, so my views about bunnies are different. But I don't have a job. Like if I lived on a farm, I totally understand why would they think. I don't. I live in the city. I If I go into a pet shop, I might see a bunny in there. So my relationship with bunnies is very different. Um, but as long as we don't like, you know, as long as we don't moralize, I guess that's the question. We don't moralize about their life. Yeah. The difference is the numbers in Australia. And you say, yeah, okay. So maybe in America, you don't have as many bunnies as we do. Yeah. Also, maybe this is the case. I think, and I could be wrong. And this might be the reason why bunnies in America are different to bunnies in Australia, is that I feel in America people are more religious. right? And in Australia, people are less religious. And therefore, maybe the bunnies in Australia feel more free to express their sexuality, right? But in America, where it's more moral, it's more religious, there's more of a stigma for bunnies to have more babies over there. You know what I mean? Because in Australia and Europe and Scandinavia, we have a very open relationship with people being with other people. We don't sort of judge people. We never see platypuses outside of zoos. Yeah, I've seen platypuses outside of zoos in Australia. They're actually beautiful animals. Yeah, there's some of the I think platypuses are some of the nicest creatures we have in Australia. Sorry, is it platypus or platypuses? Oh, platypus. Platypuses is like many of them. No, sorry. Sandra asked a question before. Um, did you ask Sandra? Did you ask? Were we talking about the midterms? Maybe we should go back to. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, Joe. Yeah, thank you, Marnie. What was I talking about? Yeah, so going back to the politics of the midterms. So yeah, I think the Democrats will win the House. Um, they freak me out, but sure, they are all lovely. Yeah, they are. They're amazing. They're amazing animals. Um, I think the Democrats will win the House, but I think they'll have less chance with the Senate. That's what I believe. That's what I believe. But anyway, I do have to go because I want to watch the soccer game. I just realized that I've missed 15 minutes of the soccer game because the soccer game started like 15 minutes ago. So I'll do another one soon. But thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, Elise. Thank you, Sandra. Uh, thank you, Marnie. Thank you, Tamara. And special thanks to the Cajun Contrarian. Thank you for coming on. I really appreciate that. I appreciate you coming on. Yes, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Um, and anyone else who is here as well, I'd like to thank as well. So thank you everyone very much. Kimmy, of course, Kimmy, Dave from California, thank you so much. In Alaska, bunnies are overrun everywhere. Yeah, that doesn't surprise me because Alaska, I think, also has a very open um, idea about people's private. I'm sorry, forget it. Anyway, thank you so much, guys. Really appreciate that. Thank you so much. Bye bye.